Welcome to episode 3 of So You Want to Be a Baobab Processor. My name is Gus Le Breton. I am here in the beautiful seaside town of Kilifi on the coast of Kenya in East Africa, and I am here today to talk to you about the mechanics of turning these baobab seeds into this baobab seed oil. I hope you guys are watching this because you've already watched the 2 preceding episodes. Episode 1 in this series describes the baobab product market, different products that you can produce, encouraging processors to develop a complete understanding of who their market will be before they get into baobab processing. Episode 2 is about processing baobab fruit powder, and this one, episode 3, is about baobab seed oil. So the critical first step in ensuring that you are producing top quality baobab seed oil is to make sure your seeds have been properly prepared before you put them into the oil press. Proper preparation means making sure the seeds are as clean as possible from residual powder and impurities without making the mistake of soaking them in water, because if you do, that water will get into the oil and will spoil your oil. So do not wash the seeds, but simply make sure that they have been cleaned, ideally as an output of a separate baobab powder processing facility. So once the seeds are clean, you're going to want to put them into the hopper of the oil press, whatever press you're using. Now, most people use this type of press. This is a standard Chinese screw press or extruder. This one's called the 6YL or the 4YL. They're different sizes. They're available all over Africa. Lots of backup technical support, very simple to use. The way they work is that the raw material comes in at the top here. It goes through a screw, and then what you get coming out are 2 different products, the oil and the press cake. The press cake is the residue of the seeds after the oil has been extracted. Don't throw the press cake away. It's very useful. It's got high protein content and makes an excellent additive to stock feeds, particularly for cows and goats and sheep. But of course, it's the oil that we're really after. Now, this oil press tends to run at a relatively high temperature if you put pure baobab seeds into it, because baobab seeds are really hard and the press isn't really used to coping with that kind of hard material. So a better thing to do is to mill the seeds before you put them in. Just put them in some kind of a grinding mill. You'll crush them up into a sort of meal. Make sure it has not been contaminated with any other products, and then feed that meal in to the top, and then it goes through the extrusion process. Quite often you'll see experienced baobab oil processors taking their press cake and feeding it back in a second and even a third time to make sure that they have fully extracted all the oil from the pressing process. Now, it's really important to understand the need to control temperature during this process, because if the temperature gets too high, your oil will be spoiled. It's very easy to tell spoiled baobab oil because it's very visually dark and it smells. It has a very characteristic burnt smell. The market for baobab oil is for cold pressed oil. Cold pressed, the term cold pressed means that the temperatures have not got too high, generally above 60 degrees Celsius in the production process, because high temperatures do tend to not only spoil the oil, but also to negatively affect some of the health properties of the oil. So in order to make sure the temperatures are kept within those parameters below 60 degrees, if you've got milled seed, that will make it easier. And you just need to manage the speed at which the raw material flows through the press. That's a knack. It takes quite a lot of trial and effort before you really get that. But if you see smoke coming off at any time, you know the temperature is too high. If the oil is too hot to touch when it comes out, you know the temperature is too high. And if the oil is dark and smells bad, you know the temperature is too high. So then you need to adjust the press, loosen it off a bit so that it's not going quite so hard. So once you've got the oil and it's come out of the oil press, that's not the end. You would ideally like to filter it as well, just to make sure that there are no impurities in the oil, perhaps no water or residual moisture, anything that could spoil oil or make it look less appealing to the customer. There are many different ways to filter baobab oil, from a very simple feeding the oil through a kind of a cloth to much more sophisticated, specially constructed oil filtration systems. Depends on who your market is, who you're ultimately aiming at selling your product to, as to how sophisticated you go. But the critical thing is that you allow the oil to settle, you filter it, and then you make sure that it's as clean as possible. Once you have got the final oil, generally you will have it in a bucket or in a tray. It's come out of the oil pressing. Before you can sell your oil, you need to check that it meets a number of key quality parameters. The first and most important ones are, as I've already mentioned, in terms of color and smell. So if you have burnt the oil, it will be a very dark color, and it will clearly smell burnt. It smells a bit like burnt peanuts. It's very obvious. No one wants to put burnt peanut smell onto their skin. So it's quite clear that that is not acceptable. You also need to check it visually to make sure there are no impurities. You didn't accidentally let some seed coat or some other things get into the oil. Other parameters, quality parameters, very important, are microbiology. This is not something you can test yourself. It will need to go to a lab. But you don't want to be selling a product that is contaminated with a fungus or perhaps with very high levels of bacteria, because that will then spoil the oil at some point later on. And most, particularly export customers, will require evidence of the microbiology. They will also require evidence of the pesticide residues. I've talked about pesticide residues in my previous video. This is also something it's very important to monitor. It's easy to avoid because there's no pesticides used in the production of baobab, but it's all about where you store the seeds and the pulp and seed before you process. And then the final parameters which your customers will probably be asking you for is another little simple lab test. And these are two sort of technical terms: AV, which stands for acid value, and PV, which stands for peroxide value. And AV and PV is a number, and you need to make sure the AV and the PV levels are within an acceptable range. If not, it indicates that there is a potential problem with the oil, which might cause it to have a shorter shelf life, or may be indicative of other impurities in the oil. So that is the final of the battery of tests that you need to conduct on your oil to make sure the AVs and PVs are within acceptable levels. Then you've got the oil out. Now it's about storing it. Storage is generally in a 20-liter bucket, or if you're producing a lot of oil, maybe it's in a 200-liter metal drum. Make sure it's a brand new drum and it's clean inside. It's ditto with the bucket or the container, plastic container. The oil should be stored indoors. It should be stored in a dry area, preferably in a dark area where there's not too much exposure to UV light, until it's ready to go. Baobab oil does have a relatively long shelf life, a couple of years, as long as it's stored properly. But the critical thing is to make sure right at the beginning that you're storing it right, otherwise you can spoil it. So that is my flying overview to baobab oil production. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've also watched the 2 previous videos in this series, So You Want to Be a Baobab Processor. There's probably a link for them down there. It could be up there, maybe somewhere over there. But the first video was all about the importance of understanding your market. The second video on baobab powder production. And this was my final video on baobab oil production. Just as a closing sentence, there is baobab found in many parts of Africa. It's an absolutely wonderful product. Developing baobab processing creates income opportunities for rural people to harvest the baobab fruit. So it's all a good thing, but it is critical that you have a clear understanding of what your market is going to be at the end, because otherwise you may find you're producing a lot of baobab products, but you got nowhere to sell them, which is not an ideal outcome. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Please check out the other videos if you haven't already seen them. I will catch you later. Take it easy. Bye.